Hello, everybody. This is Robert, your instructor for this MiraCosta summer class. Chapter 5 in the Irony book is going to be talking about media, and those who control the television networks are the most powerful people in the nation. And when you think about it, what does mass media do? Mass media informs us. Mass media persuades us. Mass media socializes us. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. But the people that run these stations can act as gatekeepers to see what news gets out and what news doesn't get out. So I think those are the important things. The media kind of sees themselves as an active participant in our political process, whether it's MSNBC, Fox, CNN, Huffington Post, Politico. All of them have an effect on people and socialize us on how to feel about certain news items. Now, when we think about the news media, what should their main responsibilities be? Obviously, to report events, discover events, assign events political meaning, interpret their importance, in a sense also challenging government officials, and kind of defining the problems of society. Right now, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And we have real heightened racial tensions right now with as far as police and some of the police brutality that we've seen. So those are the problems in our society now that are getting a lot of media coverage. Sorry, a big car went by my window. I don't know if you guys can hear it. Let me let it go. Okay, if you look at this link that I have here, we'll bring it up. And basically what it says is that how do we get our news? According to this research, 85% of people get their news through a mobile device. Now, this survey was done in 2017. I couldn't necessarily find a more current survey. There are some conflicting numbers that I see on other websites, but I'm going to go with this because 85% still is an incredible number, but it still sounds low. You know what I mean? How many of us have news notifications on our phone? How many of us look at maybe something like Twitter to see the news going on in the world? That's how I get my news. I'll look on Twitter, or I'll go on if I get a notification about some news event and go and research that way. Now, the one thing we always obviously have to be careful with is fake news, which is kind of something that's been integrated into our lexicon now. We have the myth of the mirror, and some media elites simply claim that the media mirrors reality. And they have the power to elevate national issues, ignore others, elevate obscure people. And I got a good example of obscure people that got elevated. I'm pretty sure you all could come up with a family that was really, relatively unknown until a certain person had a tape with another person that got publicized on the internet, and now we have a whole family that has a makeup line. I think you know who I'm talking about, the Kardashians or the Jenners or whatever. They can elevate obscure people, and think about all this obscure people that we have that, how did they get famous? And a lot of it is through news media. Let's go ahead and skip that and look at 2019. Last year, if we look at readership, and the survey wasn't really definitive on if this is a home-based delivery number or if is it based on people that actually subscribe by home delivery, or by going down to Starbucks and buying a paper, or by going to their website. But the USA Today is the biggest newspaper with the highest readership. Then we have the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, the New York Post. And as you can see, a lot of these papers are in cities that have big populations. So also, like we talked about, the news media decides who and what are newsworthy, and allocates time according to that. Like I said, media attention can create events, issues, and personalities, and we talked about that. The news media also helps us interpret the news. How should we feel about a certain issue? And at the third point, we talk about ideological talk show hosts, whether it's Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Rachel Maddow, who else? Tucker Carlson, on the radio, Rush Limbaugh. All of these talk shows puts a partisan spin on these issues, And the people that watch them kind of get influenced and are taught how to interpret issues. So if we look at maybe some of the protests that are happening in this country still, Fox might interpret it differently than CNN and so on. I don't have to tell you guys that. I'm pretty sure you are familiar with all that. They also socialize us. They teach us what is important. What are our norms? What are our values? Social media is a big part of this, right? Social media spreads societal norms and values without somebody getting involved. And the whole aspect, I think it's good and I think it's bad with social media that, we have instantaneous information that can come out, but also it's kind of hard to decipher what's real and what's not real. I got to admit, when Trump was elected, somebody sent me a post saying that Trump said back in the 90s if he would ever run for president, he would run as a Republican because they're the dumbest part of the electorate. I thought that was pretty funny until I found out that was fake news, right? So you have to be careful on what you look at and what you socialize with. Personal blogs, which I guess you could maybe say something like Reddit now is an important thing where people can get some of their news and maybe talk about some issues. Again, you have to watch the fake news aspect of that. Websites that you can run. With things like Reddit, I'm not a member of it, so I'm not really sure if there's a cost. I don't think there's a cost for Reddit. So it's free. Twitter's free. Facebook's free. Instagram's free. And the best part of this is you can reach mass audiences in seconds. But then again, like I said, you have to watch the possibility of fake news coming out there. The news also persuades us. It occurs when governments, corporations, unions, political parties, candidates make attempts to affect our beliefs and attitudes or behavior. And we're seeing a lot of this on social media platforms. And I know there's been a lot of kind of pushback on Facebook and Twitter to clean up some of the fake news that's out there. But I really don't know how, other than giving ability to people to flag news events, which Twitter has done. I'm not really sure it's possible to totally filter out fake news, and we're going to use the term fake news or false news or whatever in these examples. Political campaigns are the most obvious examples. When I was in Nevada for a couple of days watching TV, there was a lot of pro-Trump commercials that were on TV. I haven't really seen any ones here in California, and it just makes sense because Nevada would be considered a swing state. So news programs with Trump, or commercials with Trump bad-mouthing Biden, are trying to persuade us to feel a certain way. Corporations, remember when we talked about super PACs, they do that as well. Unions, I'm part of the American Federation of Teachers, and I get emails every day about political activism and some of the things that our union is trying to advocate for. Even though there's some things that I agree with and some things that I disagree with, they usually try to persuade us to feel a certain way about an issue. And this is all done through media. I get emails or texts or stuff like that. They also set the agenda, and I think this is one of the more important things that the news media does. They set the agenda. They say what news stories are important and what news stories are not important, right? So if a news story doesn't get a lot of press, that probably means the news media doesn't think it's important, even though if we hear about it, we may think it's important, right? Political elites decide on what the solutions to our problem is. A lot of members of Congress and a lot of people on the left are talking about defunding or disbanding the police departments throughout the country. They're using social media and news programs as a way to kind of set the agenda and say that this is an important issue, and also kind of persuade us on how to feel about that issue. Here in the United States, and for those of you, if we have any foreign students here, one thing you got to understand about the United States media and the United States populace is, for some reason, we like bad news. We like salacious news. We like news that gets our attention, right? Bad news is good news. Good news doesn't stir audience interest. And I have a good example of this. So one time I was watching the news, and there was a story about the girl that sold the most Girl Scout cookies here in San Diego. And that wasn't the newsworthy part. What the newsworthy part was that a lot of the other parents were mad that she set up her cookie stand right in front of a dispensary here in San Diego. And as a result, she sold the most cookies. Now, you can either say that's wrong for a minor to go in front of a dispensary and do that, or you can call that a marketing genius. And to be honest with you, if that was my daughter, I'd probably say she's a marketing genius. But yeah, good news is bad news. Bad news is good news. Sorry, I got it backwards. Entertainment programs reinforce the negative picture of life in the U.S. Murder is the least common crime here in the U.S., but it's the most covered on TV, whether if you watch movies or television programs. One of my favorite shows that I've seen in the past 2 years is on Netflix, and it's called Narcos. And there's been, 5 seasons of it, and it is a very, very, very violent television program. But it is so well made. So if we look at movies, if we look at TV, things like Law and Order, NCIS, CSI, all of these are pretty popular programs that involve murder, violence, and that's kind of what we like here in the United States. I mean, I don't want to sound like I don't like a good action movie, because I do, but, that's really not life here in the United States, but it's portrayed that way. Sex and violence. Historically, newspapers really tried to stay away from reporting on the sex lives of political figures, but today there's really no limits. Now, I wasn't alive during this time, so I can't really confirm it. I've heard rumors about it. There's been pictures. There's been innuendo that Marilyn Monroe and John F. Kennedy were carrying on an affair. Now, I never seen any proof of that. And I don't think there's any that's out there, unless we have former Secret Service come out and talk about it. But why didn't the news media report on that? I think more of it is that during that time, people had a little bit more respect for the office and tried to hide that, especially as popular as a candidate that Kennedy was. But right now, there's no limits, and we've seen in the age of Trump how some of his indiscretions or some of his actions have been reported by newspapers or programs, but it's not really important to people anymore. It doesn't seem like that. And entertainment has become increasingly sex-obsessed and profanity-ridden. And I think Narcos is a perfect example of that. And Ozark is another good one. If you guys throw out any type of other shows, we could talk about this during our chat. Some of them are really well made, but yeah, it's all violence, sex, and bad language. Sometimes, all of this stuff, when we're exposed to scandal or corruption, we tend to lose trust in government and in its institutions. So we've seen that as a pattern where trust in government has gone up and steadily declined since the Kennedy administration, right? We kind of get a television malaise with this, where we don't kind of trust some institutions now because they let us down, right? So when we see scandal and corruption, people tend to lose confidence in government, and as a result of that, they don't participate, and it creates a cynicism and declining in voter participation. We also have the book claims that we have mainstream violence and sex may be an expression of freedom, but in some programs, we have a glorifying brutality and denigration of women. Maybe this is a question that I'll ask you all when we're all together on the group chat, especially the females in the class. I can see where they're going with this, but maybe we could talk about it a little bit, and maybe I can get a female perspective on that. We do have bias in television networks. Obviously, Fox caters to the conservative voters, and MSNBC was kind of catered to the liberal voters. I'm not sure if there's really a neutral website or a neutral news source. Maybe NPR, but remember, NPR is funded by the government, so there might be things that they say that in order to kind of stay away from the government's bad list. I don't know. I always found NPR to be a little bit more centered than the other news organizations. Now, we also have the side that's a very important part of our political spectrum is the Hollywood liberals. Hollywood plays an important role in socializing young people to the political world. Hollywood elites are 4 times more likely to be Democratic than Republican. And if you think about some of the big wigs in Hollywood, the big stars, they're usually left-leaning, whether it's George Clooney, Ben Affleck, Leonardo DiCaprio. All of these people could have used their fame to help push the liberal agenda. Now, is that good or is that bad? I mean, that's open to interpretation, right? But I'm willing to, kind of say that it's a very true point where we think that young people are socialized by some of these famous people. I think if somebody like Kylie Jenner comes out and says the vote for Joe Biden, I think it's going to influence a lot of her 18, 19-year-old followers to do that. So I think it does play an important role. There's not too many people, I believe, that are on the right in Hollywood that I know about. I know John Voight, James Woods, Bruce Willis a little bit, Clint Eastwood, obviously, but they're not as prominent as people on the left. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the First Amendment and bias and slander in the press. Freedom of the press means, the government may not censor news items, right? So if the government has military secrets, it must not let them fall into the hands of the press or internet people or things like WikiLeaks, right? So the best way to keep a secret is to not talk about it, right? So the way to keep military secrets still secret is to keep it out of the hands of the press. And to be honest with you, to be very, very honest with you, there's probably things that we as citizens are better off not knowing. Okay, so absence of malice, when we have libel and slander, these aren't necessarily protected by the First Amendment. There might be consequences to either libeling somebody, meaning that you write something in print that denigrates or hurts a person's reputation, or slander where you speak it and it might affect a person's reputation. These words aren't protected by the First Amendment, and we'll talk a little bit about freedom of speech when we get to the civil liberties part, because there's a pretty good case that we could talk about where if you say something that creates a clear and present danger, then it's not necessarily protected by the First Amendment. Now also you have to include libel and slander into that. There's a case called New York Times versus Sullivan, and it establishes the standard on which somebody can sue for libel or slander. The actual malice standard requires that the plaintiff in a defamation or libel case must be the person to determine that their reputation has been harmed. Okay, if a public figure proves that the publisher of a statement knew that the statement was false or acted in reckless disregard of the truth, you could sue. But the burden is on the person the burden is on you. Hold on. There goes the car again. Okay, sorry. The burden is on you to determine determine to what extent that statement damaged your reputation. And you also have to prove that the person that made the statement did it with reckless disregard for the truth, right? There was a time, and I'm not quite sure if he still does it, there was a time that Tom Cruise would sue news organizations who claimed that he was gay. Now, I mean, it might be a little bit hard to determine a public figure on how much that could damage somebody's reputation. So say, for instance, some publication says that Tom Cruise is gay. He gets upset and he sues. It might be a little bit harder for him to determine that it's affecting his reputation because there's really no way to quantify it. I mean, I don't think you could maybe find a number of people that might refuse to go to his movies now, but I don't know if there's a really good way to quantify that. Now, let's say this for an example, and this is a pure example. Please don't believe this. Say, for instance, somebody says that I trade good grades for money or favors, right? So what I could do is I could quantify that, because say that I lose work out of that, I could be able to quantify that's damaged my reputation. So it's a little bit different between a high-profile public figure and then an instructor who works at MiraCosta College. The internet has become a major source of news, especially for younger people. And like you said, I think most of us get our news through websites. Now, websites are a little bit, kind of sketchy at times. The internet allows for unrestricted freedom of expression. Originally, they tried to pass something they called the Communications Decency Act of 1996. What it tried to do is it tried to outlaw decent and offensive material on the internet. It was struck down by the Supreme Court in 97. And what they said is the government can't limit content that is available to the adult population, and trying to state that they can only consume what is fit for children. We have a bureaucratic organization called the Federal Communications Commission. It is part of the executive branch here, and it kind of regulates what can go out on radio, television, satellite, and cable. And one thing that I kind of wanted to really emphasize with this FCC is that is a very, very subjective view of indecency, right? Something that might be indecent to me might not be indecent to you. So it's kind of a subjective view of content. Between 1990 and 2004, Howard Stern, a radio DJ who has made a lot of money, who has made a name for himself, has been sued for 2.5 million, or not sued, let me take that back, has been fined 2.5 million for airing material deemed indecent. So the FCC has fined Howard Stern and his radio show up to 2.5 million for what they believe was content to be indecent. If you go on, I'm not going to go over them, but if you go on the internet, you can see what some of the fines were for. Some of them are really graphic, so be careful when you look at them. But yeah, 2.5 million is crazy. Another thing was the Janet Jackson, Justin Timberlake controversy. They had a performance during the Super Bowl in 2004, not the Supper Bowl. I got to change that. Sorry about that. Janet Jackson's breast was exposed for 9/16 of a second. I remember watching it when it happened, and I was like, whoa, what was that? And then everybody started making a big deal about it, and that's when it really became a big news story. I mean, I didn't originally think it was a big deal. I didn't even notice it until people started to complain about it. CBS was fined by the Federal Communications Commission $550,000. Although this was originally overturned by the Supreme Court. Now, one thing that is mandated is a 5-second delay is not required on live performances. So I'm a big NBA fan, and I like to watch the NBA. So you could tell when somebody drops a naughty word during a game, because you'll hear audio and then all of a sudden you hear dead air. That means somebody probably dropped a bad word and they hit the button, and there's a 5-second delay on that now. Another one was Saving Private Ryan. And I don't know if any of you have seen this movie, but it is a very, very good movie. But it's also a very, very difficult movie to watch, especially the first 20 minutes. What the first 20 minutes talks about is, or illustrates, is the D-Day attack, which we'll talk about when we get into World War II. It's very graphic. It's very real. Steven Spielberg shot it from a first person's perspective. And I remember watching it in the theater and hearing getting the feeling of bullets going over your head through the way the audio was recorded. A very violent movie with bad words, graphic. In the wake of the Timberlake Jackson incident, television stations were afraid to air the movie unedited on Veterans Day. The FCC later decided that the movie was not obscene, and I agree with this because, if you look at it and if you take out the violence and if you take out the bad words, you're taking out the art of the movie. And I'm pretty sure that if I was in war, I wouldn't be saying, "Oh golly gee, someone's shooting at us." I'd probably be saying other words. But to take away that is kind of disrespectful to the memory of those people that fought for us. So social media, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all have effects on the electorate. As a result, the media has replaced the party as a principal link between candidates and voters. We have a direct link to Donald Trump right now through his Twitter, even though he probably won't read the comments that we make, or AOC, who's really effective at using Twitter, or Bernie Sanders, who's effective at using Twitter. We all have direct links to them. And a lot of these media campaigns will focus on a candidate's image, not necessarily policy questions. Media covers elections as a game of speeches, rallies, press conferences, travel, and debates. And as we get closer to 2020, November of 2020, we'll see more of that. We also have horse race reporting. Right now, this is a very real thing. And if you look at the polls right now, Biden is beating Trump in some states, but I wouldn't necessarily put a lot of stock into that until we get closer. The media treats campaigns like horse races. Who is ahead? Who is behind? We like negative coverage, which we talked about. And we have the shrinking soundbite, which is kind of dangerous because the average soundbite for a presidential candidate has gotten shrunk to about 8 seconds, which is not good because we don't really know the context that somebody's trying to speak. We have late night laughs. Presidential candidates appeared on late night programs over 100 times. We have things like Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon. All of them have an influence on presidential elections. And, you know, Jimmy Kimmel is a very ardent critic of Trump, so you see on his show he has a lot of negative things. Also, The Daily Show and Last Week Tonight are significant sources of political information. They're left-leaning, but I think The Daily Show is one of the better programs. I really enjoy Trevor Noah and his impact through his television program. Okay, that's all I got for the media. We'll come back and we'll talk about more things later. Have a good one.